Hello and welcome to my channel. It's story time. Today, instead of reading out of our small Ronald book, I'm going to be reading out of my big Ronald book folder. This one has lots of stories in it. But it will mean it's down in front of me, so you have to forgive me if I keep looking down. I'm reading the story for you. There are so many, although I write them, there's no way I can keep them all in my head. So let's get started. Now this particular story was written for a very good friend of mine. I hope you like it. I hope she likes it. Let's get started. Mrs. Ronald finds a new best friend. Even though Ronald, normal characters, and Mrs. Ronald lived in a church, Mrs. Ronald still wanted to learn more about God, but was not sure how to go about it. That was until the church sent a representative into her work. At the time, Mrs. Ronald worked in a big office, and she spotted a notice saying, Alpha course, starting on the 10th of January. This looked interesting, and she made phone calls to find out more about it. When the day came, she went along to the room where the Alpha course was being held. Slightly nervous, she did not know who might be there or what the course would be like. She went into the room and she found that there was only Mr. Dimple the vicar. We know Mr. Dimple, don't we? And a helper with him. She introduced herself and the vicar introduced himself. Well, of course, Mrs. Ronald actually knew the vicar, but for this story, they're introducing themselves. And they decided to give it a while, just in case any others turned up. They waited. But, luckily for Mrs. Ronald, no one else did turn up, and she had the course all to herself. But she felt very sorry for Mr. Dimple. Poor Mr. Dimple, who'd gone to all the trouble of setting the course up. She learnt that it had taken him 18 months to be able to get the offices to actually run the course. And it was disappointing that only one person came. However, on the second session, a lady called Genevieve came along. Let's meet Genevieve. Do you like her? She's pretty. She's got lovely cross earrings. Nice pretty skirt, bow on the back of her skirt. She's pretty as Genevieve. So this is Genevieve. And she came along, but she was not there to learn. She came along to support whoever had turned up. Well, as that was only Mrs. Ronald, they found their meetings grew into a really good friendship. Genevieve would go each week to support Mrs. Ronald. And even when the sessions were finished, they met up once a week to discuss the Bible and talk over any questions Mrs. Ronald might have. One time, Genevieve went away on holiday to the Holy Land, Jerusalem. When she came back, Mrs. Ronald was very pleased to see her. Genevieve has also bought Mrs. Ronald a present back. It was not big, it was not expensive, but it meant a lot to Mrs. Ronald to be thought of while Genevieve was away. It was a very colourful fridge magnet. Mrs. Ronald was very pleased with the present, and she showed it to Ronald, as she would. Ronald, being Ronald, wanted to borrow the fridge magnet to paint a big canvas of the picture. And we've already said that the big canvas is a huge piece. It's not paper, it's a material. That's why it's canvas. But you can paint on them. That would be nice, said Mrs. Ronald. Off Ronald set to the craft shop to collect a rather large canvas and some more art paints. He could always have more art paints. The canvas was rather big to put on his painting easel, so he balanced it on the sideboard so that he could do his painting. It was rather tricky working from such a small magnet and transferring it to a big canvas. But Ronald managed it. You see, there's the magnet. And although that time it's on his easel, he's got it off of the top and he's put it onto his easel when it was finished, because he could do that. When the picture was ready, he showed it to Mrs Ronald, who thought it was brilliant and could not believe that Ronald had managed to paint such a big picture from such a small magnet. To top it all, Ronald wanted to give the picture to Genevieve for being such a nice friend to Mrs Ronald. Genevieve was over the moon. Is that Genevieve? She was going to hang it in her front room, pride of place. Genevieve could not believe either that Ronald had managed to paint it from such a small thing, and also thought it was such a nice gesture that they would give her the finished picture for her home. Nice story, hey? One of friendship, one of giving, one of Ronald painting, doing what he loves best. But it's about sharing. And although Genevieve had gone on to the course and Mrs Ronald had gone on to the course, they still found time to discuss the Bible and any questions. Of course, Mrs Ronald could ask the vicar at any time, but she could have a cup of coffee in it, a bun or something with Genevieve, which was always nice because they always discussed more as they would. I do hope you've enjoyed this story. There are plenty more to come, so do subscribe to my channel. Bye bye for now.